The week's end top stories at NBR: Liquidator versus Liquidator, venture capital ecosystem leap in activity, medical cannabis firm receives green light to sell its first product. And there's more coming right up. Kia ora and welcome to NBR This Week. We start with a wrap of the end of the week's top business stories from the authority in New Zealand business news since 1970, nbr.co.nz. Then we'll take a look back at the top NBR Today stories from the past week. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks again for joining us. The circus of the 11-year property ventures liquidation is continuing, with the new liquidator taking enforcement action against his predecessor for failing to provide documents. In September, Kevin Whitley was appointed liquidator by the Companies Office after incumbent Robert Walker was suspended from membership of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. In his first report published this week, Whitley said he'd been unable to review matters since the last report because Walker had not responded to his request for information. In his report, Whitley said he was seeking court orders for compliance under Section 266 of the Act. New Zealand's venture capital ecosystem is experiencing a leap in activity resulting from the ripple effect of many years of hard work and successful investing, according to Icehouse Ventures Chief Executive Robbie Paul. The early-stage venture capital firm has published its annual celebratory video reviewing some of the milestone capital raisings, fund launches and company acquisitions that have happened over 2021. Robbie Paul joined the NBR's Will Mace.
Startups take a long time, and New Zealand is relatively young in the venture ecosystem. And so 5 years ago, to expect the numbers that we're getting today would just be unreasonable, because 5 and 10 years prior to that, there were not hundreds of companies getting funded, right? There's this real ripple effect in an ecosystem when there's companies funded, when companies are sold, or companies are supported, or entrepreneurs return, or anything else. And now we're starting to see that in droves.
Icehouse Ventures Chief Executive Robbie Paul with Will Mace there. Shares in new listing Winton Land opened at a modest premium this afternoon, Friday afternoon, as the property developer made its debut on the NZX after raising $350 million through an initial public offer at $3.887 a share. Winton stock changed hands on market at $3.94 in the first 15 minutes of trading, up 1.4%. The stock subsequently eased to $3.89. Turnover in the first half hour was $266,427. At 2:30 p.m, the highest buy price was $3.81, with no sellers below $3.88. An Australian judge has given a New Zealand Twitter user sued by a high-profile Australian businessman for alleged defamation extra time to make further changes to his pleadings. That comes ahead of an anticipated 2-week hearing next March. Kiwi Alan Davison, a self-styled citizen journalist, operates the Stock Swami Twitter account, offering news, gossip and a cynical and cranky take on ASX-listed companies and market participants. But Australian mining investor Tolga Kumova, a former AFR Young Rich lister, is suing Davison in the Australian courts for a series of tweets made on the Stock Swami profile between September 2019 and June 2020. Which Kumova said accused him of insider trading, misleading the stock market, and involvement in pump and dump schemes. NZX-listed medical cannabis firm Rua Bioscience has received a green light to sell its first product into the New Zealand market. The product will be manufactured in its purpose-built facility in Gisborne, which received Good Manufacturing Practice GMP certification for the product earlier this year, and plans to distribute the product from the first half of 2022 as a prescription-only medicine. Rua Bioscience Chief Executive Rob Mitchell said the achievement positioned the company well as it entered a new chapter of sharpened focus in bringing product to market and creating sustainable revenue. The Ministry of Health register of products that meet the minimum quality standard shows Rua's offering will be an oral liquid with CBD content. More details on the product and pricing will be released in early 2022. Those are our top stories as we head into the weekend, the full versions of which, along with all our breaking business news, columns and opinion, are at nbr.co.nz right now. This is NBR This Week, a brief look back now at the week's top stories from our daily video business news bulletin, NBR Today. On Monday, questions about KiwiRail's value. New KiwiRail chair David McLean and whoever is appointed the next chief executive have a big challenge ahead of them convincing the Treasury that the state-owned enterprise can be profitable. In a paper to Finance Minister Grant Robertson on August 4th, obtained by NBR under the Official Information Act, the Treasury said the change in accounting treatment of the below-rail funding had a significant impact on KiwiRail's estimate of its commercial value. It had changed from a negative $3.036 billion to negative $172 million, an increase in value of $2.864 billion. But there is still a question of if and when KiwiRail's above-rail operations will become profitable. The Treasury is withholding its judgment for the moment. In its latest statement of corporate intent for the 2022-24 period, the rail company itself is making no promises. This is NBR This Week, the past week's top 5 business stories from NBR Today. From Tuesday, a warning to Tourism Holdings Limited. Analysts are warning permission for Tourism Holdings to acquire ASX-listed Apollo Tourism and Leisure may not be a foregone conclusion, given their pre-COVID dominance of the conventional RV market and their growing combined share of peer-to-peer RV rentals. Last week, THL said it had struck a deal to purchase Apollo in an all-scrip deal share swap that would see one ordinary THL share swapped for 3.68 Apollo shares, with 25% of THL to end up being owned by current Apollo shareholders. Both businesses manufacture, rent, sell and distribute motorhomes and campervans. A note from Forsyth Barr said the deal was very attractive for both financial and strategic reasons. Clearance from across Australasia's competition watchdog is required. Clearance will depend on market definition. And in its opinion, Forbar said we expect THL to get clearance, but it's not a foregone conclusion. This is NBR This Week, a brief look back at the week's top stories from our daily video business news bulletin, NBR Today. From Wednesday, prediction of surplus. The Treasury is expecting economic growth will slow considerably in this financial year as a result of lockdowns in Auckland and elsewhere. In its half-year economic and fiscal update, it's forecasting annual growth of just 0.8% to the end of June next year, compared with 5.1% growth in the year to the end of June this year. Unemployment is predicted to remain low at 3.2% before slowly rising to reach 4.1% by the 2026 financial year. Inflation is forecast to be 5.1% next year before falling to 3.1% the year after and getting to 2.2% by 2026. This is NBR This Week, the past week's top 5 business stories from NBR Today. From Thursday, a leadership change coming at Raycon. There's been a pre-Christmas surprise announcement from Raycon, where Brent Robinson, long-time chief executive and son of the founder, Warwick, has announced the company will have a new CEO from April 1st next year. The date is no April's Fool, but has come about more quickly than originally planned, Robinson told NBR. The current CEO said he and CEO-designate Dr. Sinan Altug, currently the chief operating officer, had been in talks about succession for a long time, and after bringing Altug over from heading up the global operation to New Zealand late last year, the COO had proved he was ready to step up.
I remember meeting Warren and consequently Brent and Darren in late 90s and at that time something that was amazing to me was their passion for the business, their pride and their knowledge.
Raycon CEO designate Dr. Sinan Altug. This is NBR This Week. Now we're up to Friday's top story. NBR lister Sir Stephen Tindall has invested US $500,000 in New Zealand-founded US-based methane reduction firm CH4 Global, which is developing a methane-reducing seaweed livestock supplement. The warehouse founder's investment was on top of a recent US $13 million Series A round led by deep tech investor DCVC. Registered in Delaware since 2020, CH4 uses red seaweed, Asparagopsis, to drastically reduce methane emissions from cattle and sheep. When added to feedstock, CH4's Asparagopsis supplement reduces methane emissions by up to 90%. Tindall said he was backing businesses that he hoped would have a major impact on climate change, specifically on achieving a net zero position by 2050. That's our review of the week's top 5 NBR Today stories. You can find the full versions of those stories and more with all our daily breaking business news, columns and opinion at nbr.co.nz right now. Saturday at NBR, In Fact or Fiction, Brent Edwards and Grant Walker debate Omicron, the economy, housing and those polls, while in his weekly book review, Neville Gibson reflects on a film festival fiasco. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks for watching and listening to NBR This Week. Have a great weekend and a great holiday period. I look forward to being with you again from mid-January for more NBR Today and NBR This Week.